Time to get on our suspension lowering for our OBS project. And this is going to be kind of a mix and match situation. I did not just call up one supplier and order an entire kit. In the front, we've got these Willwood Iron Pro spindles. These are 2-inch drop spindles. They'll send you the bolts for your sensor if you're still running your ABS sensors. I got these from Little Shop Manufacturing because it's going to be their brake kits that we're going to use. Reacts are also pretty popular right now for lowering spindles because they don't push out the wheelbase of your front end, so you don't have to concern yourself as much about rolling the fenders. These front coil springs are 2-inch lowering springs. They're max track. I bought pretty much everything else in this kit from Steven at Wheel 411. So if this is something you're interested in, as well as wheels and tires, he does a bunch of interior stuff too, heavy on square body and a lot of OBS stuff. Link in the description. Let him know that Grease Monkey TV told you to get there and he'll make you a good price. So he sent me the coil springs. That'll give us our 4-inch total drop up front. This is a flip kit from him. I don't have a brand or anything like that. Just Wheel 411 lowering kit as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, flip kit with the hardware. Those are gonna have to get cleaned up and painted before we even think about installing them. These are the shocks that he actually recommended, the Nitro Drop 2s, and he sent the C notches. And here's the hardware for that with the little bump stops. Knowing me, I probably won't drill and bolt every one of these locations. I do kind of like doing a little plug welding every now and then. Or maybe I'll bolt a couple and then weld the back side and the front side to the frame. And that way we've got a bit of both involved in holding these things in. Lucky for me on this project, I will not be reusing the caliper or this hub with the brake disc on it, or any of the guts inside. So I can literally just unbolt the factory knuckle and leave all that on here and just drag the whole thing out of my way before I go to install the new spring and the new knuckle. One thing you do want to keep in mind, kind of your first step you want to take, is getting that shock removed. And then you can deal with, if you're going to reuse any of this stuff, pull your dust cap, nut, backing plate, bearings. You're probably gonna get new bearings, new seal. If you are keeping your stock brakes, this is an opportunity. I think you should put it in your budget to just go ahead and buy front rotors and bearings and a seal for the back side of this. While you're in there, you know, why not take care of every service item? Got this taken apart now. One of the pro tips I'd like to give you when you're disassembling these things, if you use an impact to take the nut loose, and your A-arm typically isn't just going to fall out of here. So again, you'll back this off a little, and then if you want to, you turn the castle nut over and I thread it back down, then that's whenever I may hit it with the hammer to break that ball joint loose from the knuckle. But you don't want to have nothing there because you'll beat up the threads. Also, it would fall all the way out and the spring will come out and hit you. It could be an ugly situation. That's just a way to sort of prevent everything from exploding on you. So now we need to clean this up and put some paint on it, and then we can put our other springs and knuckles in. I just used a wire brush and scrubbed this out and put some spray paint on it. I will end up replacing these upper and lower control arms probably within a year. It'll come with new bushings and ball joints, although these ball joints are in pretty good shape and the bushings are not like destroyed. So everything actually is still functional, but I just didn't want to do everything all in one video. Really like to save a few things for additional content, because since we're not selling this truck, I don't want to build it all at once and then we're done and then I get bored of it. I noticed the sway bar bushings were looking pretty gnarly, so I was able to order those on Amazon, and they were definitely not very expensive. I just want to measure and see if you've got the 1¼ bar, which we do, and I think most of them actually are. Also, the sway bar end links would not unbolt. Just too many years of the threads hanging down there, taking up all that road grime. The good news about a 1/2 impact is it's either gonna unbolt or it's gonna break, but either way, you kind of win. I was able to get these next day as well off of Amazon, an actual AC Delco factory replacement part. There's no need in going to all that urethane specialty bushing stuff, if you ask me. It just squeaks more. I don't really see the point. These lasted 35 years and seem to be working pretty good. Now on these shocks, this is basically just like a dust cover so you don't expose that piston rod. And the holes in your lower control arms aren't quite big enough for those to go through, which I find sort of interesting. It's just right there. But I guess you could slot these out a little bit if you really want to run them, or you can feed this portion inside your coil spring when you install it and then feed that through it. Me personally, I'm just going to remove it and leave them off. All it does technically is add, or actually reduce, your shock travel by about 3/8 of an inch. But I did check the washer rests solid on that piston, so again, it's just a dust cover, not necessarily functional. Speaking of functional, your factory springs are going to have these probably worn out little rubber donuts on the top. Now you can order new ones, which is cool, or if you think about it, just move them to where there was not a lot of compression or impact on the previous install, and that way, because it's only going to contact this much area anyway, so just move it to where you've got a new thickness. I put a piece of electric tape around both sides to just hold it in place when we install it. One thing you want to also pay close attention to is this reference point in your lower control arm. You'll see where that last coil stops, and you want to make sure and index that to where your last coil stops in that pocket as well. If you don't index that properly, then you won't get the proper lowering distance that the spring is designed to provide. Because if you rotate it the other way, it's going to go down lower. I mean, maybe that's a pro tip. You can get an extra 1/2 inch or so if you clock the spring incorrectly. You also want to make sure you get in there and square it up at the top where the little guide fingers are. I'm just going to catch the outer edge of this lower control arm with my jack. Make sure you don't damage that ball joint on the bottom side, because oftentimes there'll be a grease zerk there and you don't want to ruin that. I'm just going to make sure our spring is happy where it is. Make sure we're not binding anywhere. You do want to pay attention to these little raised sections here on the bushing to make sure that it fits the opening size that you have on your frame rail. And you will be reusing the factory lower bolts, but I put a little engine assembly lube on mine. It's just kind of a trick that I always use on these older bolts, because they were pretty rusty and hard to get out before. This is just basically a way to keep them from rusting. And if we do have to service this thing in the future, like when we go to maybe upgrade our lower control arms, upper and lower control arms, these shocks ought to come out with a cordless ratchet instead of a impact. Well, this feels super light after removing that big heavy factory one that had the hub and rotor and everything on it. Don't be in a hurry to put your tie rod on because it'll just restrict the ease of movement in tightening these castle nuts and putting your cotter pins in there. And it's always recommended that you use new cotter pins. These tools, man, you can't have enough good tools to use to get in here and do the work. You give that one good little bump, then you can check and see if you've lined up with an opening for that cotter pin to go in there. And that, I believe, nailed it. We'll do the same thing on the top side. Now we'll do this sway bar, anti-sway bar, and then we'll do the tie rod ends. It's that kit. Once you look at there, the rubber bushing says, made in the USA. Just like me. If you're having trouble putting the assembly together because it seems like your bolt's too long, you may want to leave this lower bushing out, turn this washer upside down, and start the nut on there. And then run it together, see if it gets rid of some of that slack. Just what we needed. Seems like there should be a washer or something there. Voila. The last little detail on the front suspension is this bump stop. Now some people may just go under here and unbolt it and give it the full amount of travel, which I'm not a big fan of because there's going to be some metal on metal contact. I like that this level right here is what I guess GM has determined needs reinforcement, that they don't want it to go any lower than that. So my advice would be to just cut this section off the same height as this. So you may need a decent pocket knife. He's the best brother-in-law in the world, and he gave me one of these Civivis, and I can't live without him. Done. On to the back now. The first thing you want to do is relocate these jack stands from behind the engine to in front of the engine, because once we support the weight back here, just on the back edge of the cab, and remove this ballast, which is the rear suspension, it has a tendency to
will tip over and capsize.
And that's not good for anybody. So I have strategically placed these jack stands so that the frame rails are sitting perfectly level, which will allow us to sort of track our progress on the C-notch and make sure that when we go to weld those in, that the frame rails are leveled out. So next step for me is to remove the rear suspension and take this out, clean up a bunch of these bolts, get them out of the way so we can sand this frame and get it prepped, then do the install, then finish painting once we're finished with the C-notches. Also, I'll probably want to go ahead and perform the flip kit on the axle and then reinstall it in order to mark the frame of where it's going to make contact. There was no instructions with our C-notches, and sometimes I just don't really love trusting some random reference points and then your axle doesn't line up center in that notch. So I pulled the axle out, and these leaf springs, there's enough play in that front bushing that you can just pull it around, pull the hangers out from around, the shackles out of these hangers and droop it down, pull the axle out, then set it on top of the leaf springs. And then these are the components from our kit. You'll notice the hole is offset. That needs to go towards the front of the truck, which essentially moves the axle center line back. If you think about a radius from that transmission, if the rear end continues to go up, it should go back the same distance that it already was. Otherwise, you end up putting pressure against the tail shaft of the transmission. So this needs to sit in here. And my axle's not centered. It's on the jack though, so it's gonna give us a little bit of play. And this is, as I mentioned earlier, I'm kind of wanting to test fit it so I can mark the frame of exactly where my C-notches need to be. I know that they put these reference holes in them, but I just don't want to use that. I would rather see for myself where they need to go. And this plate will go here. I actually don't necessarily need to run these all the way tight. I can just jack that axle up and make sure they're seated in the plates. This will allow me to get it a little closer to the frame rails to find my potential contact point. So by leaving this space, it allowed me to bring that axle all the way up to full contact with the frame. And now this shows, see how it's not centered between those two bolt points, which is what used to be the bump stop. I'll probably mark these two places on either side, and that'll give me a good place to reference where to cut for the C-notch. So our outer line doesn't need to be exact, but you don't want to cut more frame off than you need to. So it should be somewhere close. Got this driver's side one clamped in place, and now that I have it here, you can tell the other one would have made contact with this rear shock mount. There's also a hole that it kind of lines up. These kind of line up. This one 100% lines up. Yeah, that one down there. So we know this is the driver's side. And I have changed my mind. I'm not gonna weld any of this in. I'm just gonna use the hardware and bolt it, because as we mentioned earlier with the front suspension, we may end up with tubular control arms, and we will likely in time do like a 4-link setup on this one like we did on the square body. And if you weld this in, most of the time those 4-link kits have their coil over mount integrated with their C-notch, so you don't really want to have one of these things that you're going to get rid of. So we'll just bolt it in. We're not going to be doing a bunch of towing or heavy work anyway to concern ourselves with the frame structure. This is just a street truck, and it's not going to do a ton of work. I'm going to hit these with the center punch now that they're clamped in place, and then we'll drill all those out and bolt this side in before we cut into that one. I feel like that's probably the right move to keep some rigidity in this structure, even though I've got it blocked up to hold it level. So all of our bolts will line up. Now that I'm good with that, I can take this off, sand down this section of the frame and paint it, and then put this on for good. And it's probably obvious by now that I just went ahead and sanded everything and painted it, the rear end, leaf springs, the rest of the frame. Did install this C-notch as well. I got this all put back together. One thing I would want to point out, when you go to tighten these U-bolts, you can snug them when they're at rest, but you want to jack it to full compression before you finish tightening it up. Sometimes when those leaf springs sort of lay flat, it'll create slack. Also, pro tip on these, run these bolts in tight before you drill these bolts, because they won't line up once you squeeze these two plates together if you just hit them with the transfer punch. Get our shocks in here next. My kit came with lower hardware, that was new, which is nice, but not new upper, so I'm just gonna use some new stuff I've got in my bolt bin. One of the tips you wanna make sure and be aware of is leave this strap on here on most shocks, because if they're pressurized, it tries to expand, then you have to fight it. So probably bolt this top in with the strap still connected. Drop your bolts a few times. Once you get this tight, you can angle it and maybe raise your rear end to it, or let it drop all the way. I think each application is probably a little bit different. That's gonna wrap up our lowering. Oh, little spoiler for the next video right there. 4/6 drop. I know that I did not paint this. That's because I've got a disc brake conversion kit to do there. And I didn't finish hooking all this stuff up because, again, that brake kit, I'm not really sure. It comes with its own parking brake actuators and all that kind of stuff. So I just cut off the factory. You won't have that luxury if you're trying to reuse yours. And I don't know, like, I could build an engine easier than I can disassemble some of these factory parking brake assemblies. It does look like it's gonna put our truck extremely low. You probably saw where it was getting close to compression. There's not even that much weight on the truck right now as far as the truck bed and fuel in the tank. So you can see how long it takes it before it comes off of that jack stand. Can you see that jack stand? There it is. It just came off the jack stand. And you can see how close the axle is to where the frame used to be. So if you're gonna try to get an idea of how much lowering this will do, it's a lot. I'm sorry this wasn't one of those videos that had like the truck before and truck after kind of measurements. It's just not possible. We're in a build series like this. The next video is going to be the front brakes from Little Shop, then the rear brakes from Little Shop, and then the master cylinder upgrade from Little Shop. And then we'll have this thing on the road not long after. My tires are here to put on those welds, so that's probably going to happen in the brake videos. That's when they'll sort of be revealed. Subscribe if you're not already on this channel. But even if you don't subscribe, at least follow the link that you're going to see right here, which is this entire build playlist. Thanks for watching.